quiet one tonight. There's this stretch of time that gets me. For 300,000 years, ancient humans slept by fire at night, in 2 sleeps, not 1. What they did before electric light changed the night is gentler than you'd think. If this is your night, subscribe. Stay with me. We'll wander from fire to electric light.
For most of human history, the night was long and dark, lit only by fire. And that is what we will sit with tonight. Before electric light, before the gas lamp, before the candle was a household object rather than a luxury, almost every human being who ever lived spent roughly half their time in darkness. We are very recently people of the lit hours. The numbers, when you sit with them, are quietly remarkable. 300,000 years of anatomically modern humans. Roughly 150,000 of those years spent in nights that no electric bulb interrupted. And only the last 150 years, give or take, in which a switch on a wall could pull a piece of the sun into a room. A ratio we tend to forget. The hours after sundown were not what we imagined them to be. They were not empty, not idle. The middle hours, for most of that stretch, held a steady working quietness. Not frightening, not threatening, simply the larger half of the day, and people then knew how to live inside them in ways most of us no longer do. They slept differently, sat by fires, and let stories take longer than stories need to take when there is something else to do, and talked with a patience that the lit century mostly forgot. And there was, on most nights, nothing else to do, not a problem to solve, not a void to fill. The dark was simply the other half of the world, the half lit by embers and stars, the half through which those families moved for almost all of their time on this planet. Anthropologists who have lived with communities still close to the rhythms earlier humans kept describe nights that are, by any modern measure, slow. Voices in the firelight, smoke finding someone's eyes, a child shifting on a mat, someone humming a phrase no one will write down, a dog turning, settling, turning again. I keep coming back to that last one. The dog always turns up. I'm not sure what that tells us, only that domestication runs deep in both directions, and whatever the night felt like, it probably felt like that. Fire, voices, a dog refusing to fully settle. The historian Roger Ekirch spent more than 20 years gathering accounts of how people slept before electric light. He read court records, diaries, letters, medical texts, sermons, plays, and what he found, very gently, undid an assumption most of us had not noticed we were making. Sleep, before the modern night, was not 1 block. It was 2. The hour between them was not a problem. It was its own kind of room, with its own kind of furniture, in which people of that time lived briefly each night, and then closed the door behind them. We are going to sit by a few of those rooms tonight, not to learn them as facts, although the facts will be there, not to puzzle them out, because there is no puzzle to solve. We are going to sit by them the way you sit beside a fire that someone else laid and lit, and let the warmth do its slow work. The hunters of the Kalahari, the villages of medieval Europe, the long houses of the north, the flat roofs of summer in the desert cities. We will visit gently, and we will not stay long in any one place, because the night is large and so is the patience of the people who walked through it. The fire is enough. For 300,000 years, in most of the places humans have ever lived, it was likely enough. And something in us, settling towards sleep, still seems to know that. The ground we're standing on tonight was lit, almost entirely, by flame. The historian who collected those accounts called the pattern Biphasic sleep. 2 phases, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a quiet hour between them that medieval people simply called the watch. Picture a household in rural England in the year 1560. The light goes out of the sky around 9 in summer, much earlier in winter. There are no street lamps. A candle, if there is one, is expensive. The fire on the hearth is banked, not extinguished, but reduced to coals beneath a layer of ash, the way you lay a fire down to keep it alive until morning. The household lies down. If the door has not been barred, it is barred now. If the fire has not been banked, it is banked now. Not because the household is tired in the way modern people are tired, but because there is nothing more to do, and the bed is warmer than the room, and the body knows this rhythm well. This is the first sleep. When sleep begins exactly is hard to say, but it usually starts around 10 and ends, on its own, somewhere around 2 in the morning. No alarm, no wakefulness imposed from outside. The body simply rising out of one stretch of sleep into a quiet, gentle alertness that the bedroom, the village, and the diaries of the period all seem to share. People wrote about this hour, had names for it, and seemed to have known it the way they knew any other feature of the night, without needing to explain it. The descent into the first sleep had a texture all its own. The pallet was straw or hide, sometimes both, and it sagged a little under the weight of a body that had walked and lifted and knelt for 14 hours. The cover was wool or fur, or layered linens depending on the household and the season, and it pressed gently against the body's heat until the body began to soften beneath it. The fire was not putting out flame any longer. It was putting out the infrared warmth of coals, the kind of warmth that does not leap but seeps. The breath in the room slowed, the shoulders dropped. The eyes, which had been working all day, closed without protest. Within minutes, the household was asleep. The body, falling asleep that way, was doing what bodies do. Core temperature began its slow descent, dropping nearly a full degree across the next 4 hours. On its way to the trough it would reach around 4 in the morning. Melatonin had been rising in the dark since shortly after sundown, and was now near its peak, telling the muscles to release and the heart to slow. The brain was beginning the long alternation of slow waves and dreaming that organizes the night's repair. None of this had to be thought about. None of it had to be earned. It simply happened, in the dim, warm room, the way it had happened in dim, warm rooms, for as long as there had been rooms. In the watch, the body is awake, but the world is not. The fire is still banked. The neighbors are quiet, and there are no demands pressing against the dark. Letters were written in the watch. Prayers were said. Couples conceived children, gently, in a bed that had warmed slowly through the first sleep. Some people simply lay in the dark and thought, the way most of us no longer let ourselves think, without a screen, without a task, without a clock pressing against the back of the skull. The body in the watch was not the body of full daylight. Core temperature was still low, near its trough, and cortisol, the hormone of waking arousal, was beginning its slow climb toward dawn, but had not yet reached the levels that would tip the body into morning. The brain had finished one cycle of slow-wave sleep and was now, briefly, in a state of half-thought, half-dream, a kind of soft cognition in which images and ideas drifted through without urgency. People described this state, when they wrote about it at all, as one of the gentlest hours they knew. Decisions about complicated matters were made, calmly, in the watch. The mind, briefly free from the tasks of daylight and the urgencies of full sleep, was at its quietest. A woman named Jane Sharp, writing about midwifery in the late 1600s, mentioned the watch in passing, the way one might mention a kitchen, simply part of the architecture of the night. Robert Burton, writing his Anatomy of Melancholy in 1621, recommended the watch as a time for collecting one's thoughts. Manuals on prayer described which prayers belonged to the first watch and which to the second sleep. By the time these writers put the word down, the vocabulary was already settled. Most readers in most households would have known exactly what was meant. The vocabulary was not only English. In French, the medieval texts called the first sleep le premier somme, the second somme, with the wakeful interval between them sometimes called dorveille, half asleep, half awake, a word so quietly accurate that it has no clean English translation. Italian texts had primo sono and secondo sono. Spanish had primer sueño, and if you travel east into the Arabic language texts of the same period, you find the same division described there too. Different languages, the same broken night. The ecclesiastical hours of the medieval church were laid against this rhythm. Matins, the prayers said in the deepest part of the night, were sung at the boundary between the first sleep and the watch. In monastic communities where the rhythm of the body was the rhythm of the rule, court records from the English assizes, from the year 1300 forward, casually mentioned people rising in the watch to attend to a sick child or investigate a noise outside, then returning to the second sleep. The expression was not a discovery, It was simply what the night did. The same pattern surfaces in traveler accounts from outside Europe. 16th century missionaries in the Yoruba-speaking regions of West Africa described villagers waking at the same hour and gathering briefly outside their compounds to greet neighbors before returning to sleep. 18th century chroniclers of the Tupinamba in coastal Brazil described the same. Anthropologists in the 20th century, working with the Ashe of Paraguay, the Hadza of Tanzania, and the Tiv of Nigeria, found communities that, even now, where no artificial light interrupts, sleep in 2 segments. The pattern, as far as we can tell, is not only European. It seems to be a broadly human one, with Europe simply happening to be the region whose written records preserve the most detailed accounts of it. At some point before dawn, sleep returned. The second sleep was shorter and gentler, and the body slid back into it without trouble. By the time the household woke for good, it had been through 2 cycles, with one quiet room laid between them. And the rhythm felt as natural as breathing. It was natural in the sense that it was not invented. It was the rhythm the body found when no one was telling it what to do. The same shape the night made on its own when the dark was long enough, and the fire was warm enough and no clock was pressing anything forward. Light changed it. Slowly and then less slowly. The candle improved, and the oil lamp arrived behind it, and the street lamp followed in neighborhoods that could afford them. By the 18th century, certain neighborhoods of London were lit until midnight, and the cafes and theaters of Paris kept what was, by any earlier measure, an almost surreal schedule. Late suppers, evening conversation, music played long after the medieval village would have been asleep, then gas lamps, then the hard white light of electricity, then bulbs that filled rooms entirely, and the eye, which had read the difference between dusk and dark for hundreds of thousands of years, began to forget what dark felt like. The watch did not vanish overnight, it thinned. References to it grow rarer in diaries through the 1800s. By the early 20th century, sleep manuals were beginning to describe the rhythm as if it were a malfunction. Interrupted sleep, restless sleep, a thing to be cured. The pharmaceutical industry, when it arrived, treated the gentle awakening as a problem and offered to make it stop. It did not stop, in everyone. Many people still wake briefly in the small hours and lie in a bed that feels as familiar as anything they own and wonder why they are awake. They are awake because the body holds a rhythm older than the bulb. The watch is still there, quiet in the dark, with nowhere left to go. That detail stays with me. Something so old, just quietly persisting, while everything around it changed. In the early 1990s, a sleep researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health named Thomas Ware placed a small number of subjects in conditions with no artificial light, where the only available illumination was natural daylight from the window. After a few weeks, most of the subjects drifted, on their own, into a biphasic sleep pattern. They went to bed earlier, slept for about 4 hours, woke in the small hours, lay quietly for 1 or 2 hours, and fell back into a second 4-hour sleep. They reported feeling unusually rested and unusually contemplative during the wakeful interval. The body, given the conditions it had evolved for, returned to the pattern Ekirch had documented in 500 years of European writing. It did not have to be taught, it simply emerged. Ekirch, when he gathered all of this together, did not present it as a discovery so much as a recovery. The pattern had been hiding in plain sight, in 500 years of letters and diaries and casual mentions, waiting for someone to notice that all of those mentions described the same thing. He found the word watch in dozens of languages and dozens of regions, all describing the same hour, the same posture, the same gentle sense of a household briefly listening to itself in the dark. A first sleep and a second, with 1 watchful hour between them. Older than any record, and still, apparently, in us somewhere. We have, in our time, mostly given it up. The lights stay on. The phone glows by the pillow. The body, asked to sleep through the watch, often refuses, and we lie awake and call ourselves insomniacs and reach for something to fix it. Perhaps there is, in fact, nothing to fix. Perhaps the body is doing what it has likely always done. And perhaps something in the dark is still, very quietly, waiting for the second sleep. Most of us just never give it the chance. There has, of course, almost always been a fire. Controlled fire is older than our kind. Nobody knows quite when our ancestors first held it as their own, but the earliest accepted evidence comes from a cave in South Africa called Wonderwork, a long, low cavity in the side of a hill. In its deep sediments, archaeologists found ash, charred bone, and burned plant material in layers a million years old, not a single hearth. A pattern of hearths repeated season after season by people who were not yet quite us. Homo erectus, almost certainly, a group that walked upright, made tools, and, on certain nights in this particular cave, sat by a fire. No one knows the names of those people or what they thought as the embers brightened. A million years is hard to hold, so it is worth holding it twice. If a generation lasts 20 years, that is 50,000 generations of people sitting by fires they had made themselves. Before language as we know it, before art, before agriculture or cities or any of the things we usually call civilization, which is to say before almost everything we name when we name our history. The fire was there, the bodies gathered around it, the night moved past, and someone fed the flame to keep it warm until morning. By 400,000 years ago, in a cave called Kesem, in what is now Israel, the evidence is unmistakable. A central hearth, repeatedly used. Tools clustered around it. Animal bones placed where the fire could reach them. The shape of a domestic life, organized around a single point of warmth and light. By 300,000 years ago, when anatomically modern Homo sapiens was beginning to walk through the African landscape, fire was already woven into the fabric of how people lived. Most people born after that date, in the cultures we have evidence for, came into a world where the flame on the hearth was already old, already familiar. Not an invention, but something inherited, passed from one pair of hands to the next, in an unbroken line that goes back further than most of us can name. A fire is a small thing, and yet, considered against the whole of human history, it is something more than small, the pivot around which almost everything else quietly turned. It changed what we ate. Cooking softened meat and broke down the cell walls of plants, releasing calories that raw food locked away, so that over long generations the teeth grew smaller, the jaw shrank, and the gut shortened enough that the brain, which is metabolically expensive, had room to grow. We did not invent the brain we now carry. Over long enough generations, cooking may well have helped the brain grow, fed and shaped beside a million years of fires. It changed where we slept. A campfire well tended is not just light, it is a perimeter. Predators that would otherwise enter a sleeping group at night avoid the flame. The night air, which had been a problem for naked apes on a cooling continent, became survivable, and our ancestors slept on the ground in the open with a fire between them and the dark, the night turning from threat into something closer to shelter. Someone had to stay awake for that, of course, had to feed the thing, had to notice when a log collapsed and the smoke changed direction and stung whoever was sleeping closest. Without fire, we would have needed entirely different adaptations to survive. And it changed how we talked. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent decades among the Juhoense people of the Kalahari, who until recently kept patterns of life close to those people had lived for tens of thousands of years. She did something very simple. She listened to what people talked about during the day, and then she listened again after dark. And she kept count. The numbers she found are quietly remarkable, not dramatic, just steady and strange in the way that real research sometimes is. During daylight, conversation ran mostly practical: food, children, disputes, trade. Roughly 7 of every 10 daytime conversations concerned the immediate, material business of being alive. After dark, around the fire, the proportions reversed. 81% of nighttime conversations, by Wiessner's count, were what she called stories. Accounts of journeys and ancestors, animals encountered, songs and dreams and memories, and the steady work of keeping a community's imagination alive. The fire did not just warm the body, something else opened too. Some room in the mind that the daylight hours kept closed, and the same people who had spent the afternoon arguing about who owed whom a haunch of meat sat down at night and told each other about the time their grandmother saw a lion in the dry season and what she said to it. I'm not sure what to make of this, honestly. That the simple act of sitting down in the dark and watching flames is what made people into people who told stories. This was not a luxury. It was, very probably, how families learned to be themselves. A child raised by daylight conversation alone learns to forage and bargain. A child raised by nighttime conversation, listening at the edge of the fire while the adults talk about people who have been dead for 50 years and animals that nobody has seen in 3 winters. Learn something harder to name but just as necessary. Both together in the right proportion is what becomes a full person, or as close to one as the evidence allows. The fire, in other words, was a school. Not the only one, but perhaps the longest running. And for something like 300,000 years, most people who have ever lived grew up partly at its edge. The shadows it threw were probably the first moving images most children ever watched. The voices that came from across the embers were likely the first stories they ever heard. The warmth pressing against the front of the body while the back stayed cool. That particular combination, reliable, repeating, requiring no effort, was a comfort unlike most others available in the ancient world. And the body learned to recognize it as home. We grew up around fire. By the time we had the vocabulary to write any of this down, we had been gathering at it for 400,000 generations, and the gathering felt as natural as standing on 2 feet. Most of us no longer have a fire. The room is heated by something invisible, and the voices come from somewhere other than a body across the embers. And yet, something in us still knows. If a person sits down beside a fire on a cool evening, something shifts. The shoulders drop, the voice quiets, the eyes go soft and steady. Briefly, without meaning to, we remember what the first home was like. The fire knew us for a long time. We are still finding out how much we knew it back. Wiessner's recordings, when you listen to the quieter ones, are surprisingly familiar. The cadence is not exotic, the pauses are not strange, and people are simply telling each other, by firelight, everything their day had only sketched in shorthand. This is one of the gentler discoveries of modern anthropology. What is curious is that night talk, almost everywhere it has been observed, sounds the same. Why should this be? Why should the firelight on every continent slow speech in the same ways? Different languages, different content, different ancestors in the stories. But the rhythm is shared. Something slows. If a story has time, the story takes time. There is a willingness to begin a sentence without quite knowing how it will end, and a tolerance for a digression that, by daylight standards, would be cut short. Several reasons account for this, none of which had to be invented. Historians disagree about which mattered most, and the answer is probably all of them working together. If the fire is doing the work of warmth, the speakers do not have to. They do not have to fetch, or stir, or chase, or watch the field. The fire takes the visual world down to a small bright circle, so the eye is not distracted by the kinds of activities that pull a daytime conversation apart. A warm body is not in a hurry. And the fire flickers, which makes silence comfortable, because something is still happening even when no one is talking. The Inuit who spent winters in the long Arctic dark had a phrase for this kind of evening. Not the night itself, but the way it changed talking. And the stories that traveled in the dark season, they said, traveled differently than stories told under the midnight sun. They were longer, more patient, allowed to be strange in ways that summer stories were not. The Aboriginal communities of Central Australia kept fires under skies so clear that the Milky Way was a banded river overhead. Their nighttime talk braided astronomy with ancestry, root-finding with song, the practical with the mythic, until the boundary between the two was not a boundary at all. Stars were people, and people were paths, and paths led to water and to families, the fire and the sky together, forming an instrument the daytime did not have access to. The longhouses of the Iroquois and the Haudenosaunee in the eastern woodlands of North America were lit by hearths spaced along the central aisle, one for every 2 or 3 families. On winter nights, when the snow piled against the bark walls and the smoke drifted up through the open ridge, talk moved along the length of the building like weather. Children listened from sleeping platforms. Elders spoke from low benches near the fire. Stories crossed between hearths the way warmth did. By morning, every person in the longhouse had heard without trying half a dozen things they would not have learned by daylight. The Arctic Sami, the Saharan Tuareg, the Andean herders in the high passes, the river villages of the Amazon, different climates, different stars, different centuries of hard-won knowledge about survival. But the same broad pattern held almost everywhere. Daylight for the practical, firelight for the rest, and people doing this, likely on every continent where they gathered and lived. By Wiessner's measure, what the firelight hours sounded like, mostly, was names. The names of people who had lived, and of places one had walked through, or hoped to walk through, or feared to walk through. The names of animals one had hunted, or been hunted by, or seen and not killed and remembered for that. Children's names. The names of grandparents whose own grandparents had taught them the names. A long, slow, patient cataloging of the world by people who knew that, without the fire, the names would slip. Memory, before writing, was a fire-tended thing, kept alive by the gathering, by the voices, by the willingness to sit and speak the names aloud again. That detail stays with me. What it cost to hold all of that in living memory, only the body and the voices keeping it, and a child occasionally losing the thread as sleep came in from the edges. We sometimes think of oral cultures as having lost something, as being incomplete, lacking the permanence that print afforded. The truth is more interesting and gentler. An oral culture is not an absence of writing. It is a different way of being a library, one carried in the bodies of the elders and in the patience of the listeners, renewed each season by the regular gathering at the fire that allowed the whole library to be reread by everyone present. The book is the night itself. We have since then externalized our memory. We write it down, photograph it, store it on servers in cool rooms. The body no longer has to carry the names. This is in many ways an improvement, and yet on certain quiet evenings the body misses the work, the way it sometimes misses long walks even after a long walk has become unnecessary. The fire is patient, is it not? The voices come and go across it. Even when nobody is talking, something is being said. The wood settling, the ember brightening as the breath of the room shifts, the faint sigh of a sleeping dog at the edge of the warm circle. These were, for hundreds of thousands of years, the quietest of human conversations, and they have not gone out. They are, in this room you are in tonight, present in some softened modern form, even if you cannot quite name them. That is probably enough to go on. Above the firelight there was, on most clear nights, the sky, the whole of it, unfiltered, running from horizon to horizon above the smoke. It is difficult now to picture what the sky looked like to our ancestors. About 80% of people alive today live under skies bright enough that the Milky Way is invisible from where they sleep. A child raised in any major city may be older than 5 before they ever see it. In some cities, fewer than a dozen stars are visible on any given night. The dome above the bedroom is, for most of us now, a dim gray-orange wash with a few bright pinholes in it. For 300,000 years, the dome above the bedroom was something else entirely. Not a backdrop, but a working presence. A ceiling that moved and shifted and kept a kind of time. A truly dark sky, the kind that almost everyone alive before the gas lamp could see on most clear nights, has somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 stars visible to the naked eye, though counts differ. The Milky Way runs across it as a soft banded river of pale light, with darker rifts inside where the dust of the galaxy hides the stars behind. On a moonless night, the sky is bright enough to cast a faint shadow. The horizon, away from the fire, is not black. It is a deep, layered, charcoal blue, with the brightest stars riding in it like distant lanterns. Human beings looked up at this almost every night of their existence, for most of that time without a single electric bulb to compete with it. Not always with attention. The sky, like the fire, did not require constant gaze. It was simply there, the second ceiling of the world, and the eyes, when there was nothing else to do, lifted toward it the way the eyes lift toward any reliable thing. The patterns we now call constellations are, in the broadest sense, very old. Their precise origins remain unknown, but star groupings are recorded in cave paintings tens of thousands of years old, and the bull in some form has been a bull on the evening sky for at least 16,000 years across multiple cultures. Orion walks across the winter sky with a recognizable belt in almost every tradition that has looked up. The shapes are not in the stars. Were anyone else looking with different eyes, the patterns would be different. The shapes are in us, and why we read them this way and not another remains one of the genuinely open questions. People looked up for practical reasons sometimes. The Polynesians sailed thousands of miles of open ocean using stars that rose and set in known patterns at known latitudes. Egyptian farmers watched for Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, to rise just before dawn because that rising marked the beginning of the Nile flood and the year of crops. The Inca encoded the Milky Way's shape into the layout of their capital city. Star knowledge was, for most of human history, navigational and agricultural and ritual and personal, though where one role ended and another began is often unclear, often all at once. But the deeper reason, the one that does not show up in formal records, is that the sky was simply where the eye went when the day was done. People sat by their fires and looked up, or they lay on their backs in summer and let the stars fill the whole field of their vision. Smoke drifting across sometimes, making them blink, and then back to the stars. Or they walked between villages on moonless nights while the rest of their attention drifted upward without quite meaning to. 300,000 years of this. They were, for almost all of their existence, an outdoor people, and the night sky was their evening companion. And the Milky Way was, in that older world, a presence you could not avoid. In the Australian bush, the Aboriginal people saw not just stars but also the dark dust between the stars, and they read those dark patches as figures. The emu in the sky, formed by the long rift of dust running through the Milky Way's plain, is one of the oldest sustained images in human astronomy, older than writing, older than agriculture. What did those early watchers think they saw on those nights? What did the river of stars suggest to the watcher who had no street lamp to compete with it? That question stays with me. The Andean cultures of South America did the same, lying back to trace the dark shapes between the stars, not just the bright ones. The Anishinaabe carried their own sky maps. The Bantu peoples of Central Africa, the herding peoples of Mongolia, the early Mediterranean sailors. Wherever the sky was dark enough to show its detail, somebody eventually lay back and saw shapes in it. This was not poetry. This was infrastructure. The names given to the stars and the patterns laid into them carried information forward. Directions, seasons, planting times, fishing times, the timing of ceremonies, the locations of distant relatives across continents. The sky was a calendar, a map, a memory palace, and a story all at once. The fire on the ground and the stars above the smoke were the two great organizing structures of the night. Between them, they kept their bearings. We have, in the modern century, mostly turned our backs on the second of these. The street lamp, the headlight, the bulb on the porch, the screen on the wall, all of them, individually small, have collectively erased the night sky from the cities where most of us live. A child raised in a city in the year 2025 may be older than 5 before they see the Milky Way for the first time, and many never see it at all. This is a recent development. It is younger than most of the houses we live in. It is younger in many cases than the photographs on our grandparents' walls. The dark sky we have lost was the everyday ceiling of every human being who ever lived before our great-grandparents. And they walked around under it without considering, most of the time, that there was anything unusual about it. The stars themselves have not moved. They have been there for billions of years, and the Milky Way has rotated about 5 times since human beings first looked up at it, turning slowly through an arc no single human life was ever long enough to notice. Essentially unchanged from where we stand. If anyone drives a few hours from a city on a clear night, the sky returns. Stop on a hill, wait until your eyes have adjusted to the dark, and then lift your face to it fully. The sky briefly comes back. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to see the river overhead, enough to find Orion, or the Southern Cross, or whatever other figure your ancestors used to find. enough to stand for a few minutes in roughly the same posture in which our people spend most of their evenings for 300,000 years. It is a posture the body seems to remember. Even if you have never been taught the names of any of the stars, something about the position feels familiar. The head tilted back, the shoulders down, the eye unfocused, taking in the whole dome rather than picking one detail. The breath slows and the shoulders go with it, the way they do whenever attention spreads out rather than narrows down. This is how people watched the night when there was no other screen. The fire and the stars. For 300,000 years, the two of them together, reliable and unchanged, above the smoke and the sleeping bodies beneath. They are still there, both of them, on any clear night, away from the city's lit haze. Most people just haven't stood under them lately. Eventually, the night came indoors. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. For most of our time, the night had been an outdoor night. The fire on the ground or just inside the cave mouth, the sky directly overhead, the first walls thin and the first roofs partial. Smoke went up through whatever opening the builders had thought to leave. For thousands of years, there was no real division between the warmth of the fire and the openness of the sky. The hearth was simply a place in the world where the wind was a little less, and the cold was a little less, and the people gathered. Then, the walls grew thicker. In the cooler latitudes, this mattered. The Mesolithic huts of northern Europe, 10,000 years ago, were already something like rooms, wattle and daub, or skin stretched over a wooden frame, with a central hearth on a clay floor. In the Anatolian highlands, at sites like Çatalhöyük, the people of 9,000 years ago built rectangular rooms entered through the roof, with whitewashed walls and hearths that left soot lines still visible on the plaster today. The night air was outside. The fire was inside. The bodies slept on raised platforms within reach of the hearth's warmth. This was a small change with enormous consequence. A house with a fire inside it is a house in which the night is qualitatively different. The smell of smoke clings to the rafters. The temperature climbs slowly through the evening and falls through the early morning hours. The light shifts as the fuel burns down. Children grew up inside these climates. The first object in their visual field, on most mornings of their early lives, was a banked hearth and the slow blue rise of fresh smoke when someone laid the first wood of the day. The hearth, brought indoors, became something more than a fire. It became the organizing center of household life, the thing the room was built to face. In the Greek and Roman worlds, the hearth was sacred. The Greeks called it Hestia, after the goddess who never wandered, who simply stayed. Every meal began with a small offering to the hearth fire. The Romans called her Vesta, and the Vestal virgins of the city tended a fire that was, in theory, never to go out. A public hearth for the Roman state, an extension of the private hearth in every Roman home. To let the fire die was to let the household, in some quiet way, lose its center. In the homes of medieval Europe, the hearth grew. By the 1100s, in the larger houses of England and France, central hearths gave way to wall-mounted fireplaces with chimneys, which sucked the smoke out of the room and let the rest of the house grow cleaner. By the 1500s, even quite ordinary farmhouses had a chimneyed fireplace at one end, and the kitchen, the room with the fire, had become the room where most of life was lived. In Japan, the irori, a square sunken hearth in the floor of the main room, did the same work without the chimney. Families ate around the irori, slept near it, dried clothes above it, hung kettles from a beam over it. The room organized itself around the heat, and it did not matter if the household was rich or modest. The Ondo system in Korea used a different approach entirely. Flue gases from a kitchen fire ran beneath the sleeping rooms and warmed the stone floors above, so the fire was outside the bedroom, but its warmth was beneath every body in the house. Maybe nobody thought much about why it felt right. Across a whole household, the floor is gently warm because one fire burned somewhere across the courtyard, and the family inside likely went to sleep without much consideration of it at all. Why did the same general arrangement appear on so many continents? In the Andes, in Mongolia, in the longhouses of the Pacific Northwest, in the round huts of southern Africa, the same broad idea took different shapes, A fire, contained but not isolated, a room organized around its heat, bodies sleeping within reach of the warmth. People fell asleep beside these fires and woke to them, and grew old beside fires that had been laid each evening of their lives. This is the deep answer to a question that does not get asked very often. Why do most of us, even in centrally heated houses, still feel something soften inside us when we sit beside an open fire? The answer is not mystical. It is simply the oldest kind of familiar. Warmth on the front of the legs, the smell of wood smoke, the faint irregular crackle, the dim low light drifting down as the fire settles. These are the conditions of safety, the way families recognize safety for most of the last 10,000 years, and the body, when it meets them, lets down its guard. It does not need to be a real fire. The brain, for these purposes, is generous. A wood-burning stove behind glass works. A fire effect heater with logs that flicker electrically works, less perfectly, but it works. Even a video of a fire on a winter evening, with the audio of crackling embers playing from a speaker, does something. The body, looking for the old conditions, finds a version of them, and the shoulders drop a little, and the room feels more like a room. For most of human history, though, the fire was real, and it had to be tended. Banked at night, relit in the morning if it had failed during the watch, coaxed along when the wood was damp. The whole household participated in keeping the warm center of the room alive. Children learned very young how to lay a fire, how to coax it from a small flame without smothering it, how to read the wood, how to judge what the coals still had in them. These were among the earliest tasks human hands learned, long before reading or counting meant anything. The hearth was a small machine for being human. It ate fuel and produced warmth, light, food, and smoke, and almost as a byproduct created the conditions under which stories could be told and retold each evening. It was the most important furniture households owned for most of recorded time. People spent more time looking at it than at almost anything else in their houses. When central heating arrived, in the late 1900s for most of us, something quiet receded with the hearth. What it was exactly is hard to say. A reason to sit in one place, a reason to face one another, and something about the hour itself, the way a lowering fire seemed to lower the whole room with it. The technology of warmth became invisible, which is mostly a triumph, and yet the room lost a center it had owned for 10,000 years. On a cool weekend now, in a cabin or a backyard or a small camping place, people rebuild it without thinking, settling around the coals the way families have always settled, without instructions. That part has not changed much. Children, almost everywhere, have been sung to sleep. Almost everywhere, and for as far back as we can trace, in ways that look remarkably alike. This is one of those facts that does not announce itself as remarkable, but when sat with, slowly becomes so. As far as anthropologists can tell, there is no human culture on any continent that lacks lullabies entirely. None that has been studied in any depth, at least. Every culture documented, every culture preserved in historical records has had songs that mothers and grandmothers and aunts and older siblings sing to small children in the dark. To settle them, to warm the small body, to bring sleep down gently from above. The oldest known lullaby comes from a clay tablet found in the Mesopotamian city of Nineveh, written in cuneiform around 4,000 years ago. It is a Babylonian song addressed to a crying baby, asking the household god to make the child quiet so the parents can sleep. The text is a little tired and a little tender, the way exhausted parents have been a little tired and a little tender for at least 4,000 years. There is something reassuring about that. Some problems are very old. That is just the oldest written one. The form is older. The act of singing a small child down into sleep almost certainly predates writing entirely, and may predate language as we know it. It may even predate our kind, though we will probably never know for certain. Chimpanzee mothers and gorilla mothers groom their infants with low, repeated humming sounds, a precise function of which, soothing, calming, the sound an infant settles into, is recognizable across primate families. Whatever walked on two legs 3 or 4 million years ago and gave rise eventually to us, almost certainly hummed at its babies in the dark. The night was long. The babies cried, and the tired adults, then as now found a sound that worked. A lullaby is simple in what it does. On the most direct level, it puts the child to sleep. The slow tempo and repeated melodic phrases, the soft breathy tone of a tired adult singing low, are recognized by the infant brain as signals of safety. And the infant brain, which is a creature designed to fall asleep when conditions are right, obliges. On a deeper level, the lullaby is the first language the child encounters, not as words, although words may be there, but as rhythm, as pitch, as pattern. The infant, even in the womb, has been listening to the mother's heartbeat and voice, the rhythms of her speech. The lullaby is an extension of those rhythms, slowed and simplified for the smallest possible listener, teaching the child, before any vocabulary is in place, that sound can be soothing, and that another body, in the dark, can be relied upon to make the soothing sound. This is how trust begins. It begins in the small hours of the very first weeks of life, when a tired adult holding a tired child finds a sound that works and uses it again and again, until the sound and the body and the warmth and the dark all blend into a single condition. The child will, for the rest of its life, recognize as the place where it is safe to let go. The lullabies themselves are often quite simple. In Russian villages, the bayushki bayu, short, slow, melodically thin, with words whose meaning need not be parsed. In Spanish-speaking households, the duermete mi niño, the beautiful ancient duermete. In Yoruba, Viololufemi. In Tagalog, the Sa Uguainunduyan. In Welsh, the Suogan. In Japanese, the Edo Komori Uta. They are not great songs in the concert sense. They are great in another sense entirely. They are tools that work, and that have worked for as long as anyone can remember. Some lullabies carry surprisingly old melodic shapes. The English rockabye baby has the cradle in the treetop. The German Schlaf, Kindlein Schlaf, has the father guarding the sheep. When the words are studied, many lullabies deal gently with the quiet difficulties of the night. And yet they soothe, because the soothing was never in the words. It is in the cadence, the infant brain, before it understands anything, understands rhythm, and a slow rhythm in a dim room, with a warm body present, is the original lullaby of every creature that nests its young. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer mothers have found something striking. The structural features of lullabies, slow tempo, narrow pitch range, repetition, soft articulation, are nearly identical across cultures. Mothers in northern Greenland and mothers in the central Australian desert sing in different languages, with different scales, on different continents, but the underlying acoustic shape is the same. It is so consistent that researchers can play a recording of a lullaby in any language to listeners who do not speak that language, and the listeners reliably identify it. The pattern is older than language. Children grew up inside these patterns, carried into sleep by them night after night. In the long firelit nights of the deep human past, a child was sung to by whoever sat nearest the fire when the baby began to fuss. Mothers, aunts, grandmothers, older siblings, sometimes fathers, sometimes any tired adult who happened to be awake. The household kept itself together with low songs. The melodies passed down through all of that. A grandmother who had been sung to by her own grandmother was singing a melody that may already have been 100 years old when she first heard it. Run that line back far enough, and you reach lullabies that have been continuously sung in the same community for centuries, and probably in some form for much longer. Most of them will never be recovered, but the act survives. We don't really know what the lullabies of 300,000 years ago sounded like, and we never will. That image stays with me. What sound a tired adult first reached for in the dark, before there were words for it. The baby kicking off whatever covered it. The fire low, the night long. But almost certainly they existed. Someone with a fussing baby in their arms, beside a low fire, in a world without bulbs, found a sound, used it, and it worked. We know this because we are still here. And in any quiet room tonight, on any continent, somewhere a tired adult is humming low to a small body in their arms. The rhythm slow, the pitch narrow, the room dim, and the small body, after a while, letting go. The adult continues to hum for a few moments after, partly out of habit, partly because the song has not quite finished settling itself in the air. Families have been doing this for so long that most of them have no idea where the melody came from. It arrived from somewhere further back, passed hand to hand, night to night, and it still works. Almost everywhere humans have lived, they have slept close to one another, tucked in beside siblings, parents, grandparents, and sometimes strangers, with the warmth and breath of other bodies as the normal condition of the night. A single bed in a single room is, across nearly all of human history, a recent and unusual arrangement, mostly a feature of the last 2 centuries, in a handful of relatively wealthy places. For nearly all of that time, in nearly all human cultures, sleeping was a shared activity. Bodies near other bodies, breath near other breath, the warmth of a family or a household pooled together against the cool of the night. The reasons were practical, at first, and practical in ways that went deeper than simple comfort. If a household was cold, bodies pressed close, and even in warmer climates they still found their way close, by habit. Heat, before central heating, was always scarce. The fire could only warm so large a room. Bodies pressed together warmed one another in ways no hearth alone could match. In cold climates, the Arctic, northern Eurasia, the high plateaus of Central Asia, sleeping platforms were often shared by entire families, parents and children together under the same furs or quilts, with the smallest bodies tucked into the warmest places at the center. In warmer climates, the arrangement was different, but the closeness remained. Village houses across South Asia had families sleeping on mats on the floor, side by side, with doors open to whatever night breeze the season would bring. Courtyard houses in the Middle East saw summer nights spent on flat roofs under the stars, the whole household laid out on woven mats, with the cool of the desert dawn the only blanket they needed. Further west, in the longhouses of the Americas, sleeping platforms ran the length of the building, families separating their spaces by hanging mats or skins. But the breathing of dozens of bodies remained, all night, a single shared sound. This was not a hardship. It was, very probably, a comfort that the modern bedroom has quietly lost. The kind of comfort so ordinary it had no name. Why the private bedroom emerged in some cultures and not others is not fully agreed upon. Anthropologists who have studied sleep across cultures use the phrase co-sleeping, or shared sleep, to describe what was, for most of human history, simply sleep. An infant slept on or beside its mother, and a toddler beside an older sibling, while the adolescent stretched out in a row with cousins and the elders settled near the warm wall by the hearth. There was simply a household, breathing together through the dark. The exact arrangements differed from place to place and time to time, in ways that no one fully knows. A great deal followed from this. Children raised in shared sleeping arrangements show, in modern studies, lower rates of nighttime anxiety. They wake into the warmth of other bodies and settle back into sleep more easily, because the conditions of safety are continuous. A hand within reach, the small breath of a sibling, the larger breath of a parent close by. The body, shaped by long evolution to recognize the presence of others as the primary signal of safety, finds those signals close at hand and lets down its guard. Adults too slept differently in shared sleeping spaces. Modern studies of couples who share a bed show that physiological synchrony develops over time. Heart rates begin to align, breathing rhythms drift toward each other, body temperatures gradually coordinate. I'm not entirely sure the science on this is settled, but the general direction of it feels right. 2 bodies sleeping in the same bed, over months and years, becoming in some measurable way a single rhythmic system. The way 2 pendulum clocks hung on the same wall will slowly synchronize. For most of history, that kind of closeness was the rule rather than the exception. If a traveler arrived at a medieval inn after dark, the bed they paid for was rarely empty. Travelers often shared a bed with strangers. This sounds startling to a modern ear, but it was simply how rooms were rented. The cost of a place to sleep was the cost of a place in a bed, and beds were big enough, and the night was long enough, and the human practice of sleeping close was old enough, that the arrangement raised few eyebrows. Travelers from different countries speaking different languages lay down beside a stranger and slept. By morning, all of them were rested. In the Japanese household, the futon laid out on the tatami mat each evening and folded away each morning made the sleeping arrangement adaptable to the family's size and shape. Babies slept against their mothers, tucked in warm and close, while older children gathered in clusters nearby. The room itself, the same room used during the day for meals and sewing and conversation, became, at night, the bedroom of everyone who lived in it. The bed was not a piece of furniture. The bed was wherever, in this room, you laid your body down. In the bunkhouses of the European peasantry and the shared chambers of the Russian peasant cottage, sleep was social. So it was in the great halls of medieval castles, where nobles and servants and dogs slept all together on the rush-strewn floor. The body in the bed beside you was, on most nights, somebody you knew. And even when it was not, people had spent enough centuries sleeping near strangers that the proximity was less strange than it might seem to us now. The shift to private sleeping rooms was, like the shift to electric light, a recent and uneven affair. It moved through the wealthier classes first. The great houses of 17th century Europe, with their suites of private chambers, were among the first places where individuals routinely slept alone. The middle classes followed slowly through the 1800s and 1900s. The working classes, in many places, did not arrive at private bedrooms for every family member until well into the 20th century. Something was lost in the shift, though it was not anything dramatic. The breathing of the household as a single soft instrument. The small night sounds that, taken together, said, "You are not alone here." The shifting of a sibling on a nearby mat, a grandparent coughing gently across the room, and then silence again. The slow, even breath of the smallest body in the warmest place. Many people, even in their own private bedrooms, still listen for these sounds. If the room is too silent, they reach for an alternative: white noise machines, fans, a partner, a dog, a cat. The instruments have changed, but the need underneath them is not, and probably will not. The body, alone in a quiet room, still asks for the sound of another body breathing nearby. That need goes back a long way. Nearly every person who has ever lived was once a small body sleeping close to other bodies, in a household that breathed together through the dark. Most of them probably slept fine. Above the firelit households, the moon kept a slower kind of time. For most of human history, the moon was the principal measure of the night. The sun, when it set, was gone for hours. The stars, beautiful as they were too many to track easily. The moon rose and set and rose again, grew and shrank and disappeared and returned, on a rhythm slow enough to be felt and reliable enough to be planned around. It was, for a very long time, the primary clock of the sky. A full lunar cycle is, on average, 29.5 days, almost a month. This is almost certainly where the month comes from. The word itself in nearly every language is a relative of the word for moon. The Romans called it mensis, the Greeks men, the Old English monath, and on through Sanskrit and Hebrew and Arabic and Mandarin, wherever you look, the word for the unit of about 4 weeks is rooted in some ancient noticing of the moon's slow turning. Pre-agricultural communities used the moon to track much more than time. They used it to plan hunts, fishing trips, gatherings, journeys, ceremonies. A full moon meant safer travel through dark country, enough light to see the path and catch the eyes of animals at the road. A new moon meant the darkest skies, the sharpest stars, the time for certain ceremonies that asked for the absence of moonlight. The phases were not abstract calendar entries. They were practical, and they shaped how the night was lived. In agricultural societies that came later, the moon's calendar interlocked with the sun's. The sun told the year, the moon told the month within the year. Festivals fell on full moons because the light made nighttime gatherings possible. Harvests were timed to lunar phases. Across much of the world's calendar, traditions, Jewish, Islamic, Hindu, Chinese, Mayan, they count by the moon in some form, even when they correct themselves periodically against the sun. For the body, the moon was something more intimate than a calendar. A full moon, on a clear night in a world without electric light, is genuinely bright. Bright enough to read large print, to find a path, to pick out shapes at considerable distances. The first or last few nights of each month, when the moon is full or nearly so, were nights of a different character. People stayed up later, children played outside longer, hunters walked farther into the dark. The dark of the moon, the 3 or 4 nights when it was either invisible or only a thin sliver, brought a different quality of evening. The fires felt closer, and the stars felt larger, and the household drew in around itself, quieter than it had been when the sky was bright. Stories were told that, at full moon, might have given way to a walk under the sky. Modern people, away from the lit haze of cities, sometimes noticed that they sleep differently in different phases of the moon, that something in the full moon nights feels later, more wakeful, a little less settled. Some studies have found small effects: slightly delayed sleep onset around the full moon, slightly more wakefulness in the small hours. Honestly, the moon and sleep studies are inconclusive. The data is mixed, the effects subtle where they exist at all, and replication has been inconsistent. But the effect is plausible. The moon was, for hundreds of thousands of years, the primary nightlight. Whatever residue of that adaptation we still carry is small, but it is for some people perceptible. The moon also marked, for many cultures, the cycle of women's bodies. The rough alignment of the menstrual cycle with the lunar cycle is approximate rather than exact, but the resemblance was noticed in many societies, and the moon became, in many mythologies, a woman or a feminine principle watching over the night. This is not a universal. Many cultures saw the moon as masculine or as something else entirely, but the noticing was widespread enough to leave a recurring impression across the long catalogue of human imagination. The moon, of course, also pulled the sea. Tides were felt in coastal communities everywhere, and fishing was timed to them. The moon's pull on the oceans familiar to anyone who lived by the shore, even when the underlying physics was not understood. The water rose and fell on the moon's schedule. The coastal villages of the world, from Polynesia to the Mediterranean to the Pacific Northwest, lived on a daily rhythm that was, in part, for the inland communities, the moon was less practical and more simply company. Walking a long road between villages, you had it overhead. Sitting on watch at the edge of the herd, it was the slow eye that kept watch with you. On a sleepless hour between the 2 sleeps, through the small window or the smoke hole, it was a reminder that the night had a shape, and the shape was passing. We have not lost the moon. It is harder to see in cities, but a full moon on a clear night still drowns out most light pollution. It rises and crosses the sky, and sets and returns, on the same patient schedule it has kept for billions of years. The moon does not need our attention. It will keep its rhythm whether we watch or not. But for almost all of human history, somebody watched. Somebody at nearly every fire, on nearly every continent, on every clear night, knew where the moon was in its cycle. When the full moon would rise, when the dark of the moon would fall. That knowledge was held by the elders, passed to children at the edge of the fire, kept as a slow and reliable count. It was a clock you could see, and people lived under it for as long as there have been people to look up. Most nights, in most human communities, somebody was awake, and the quiet around them was a different kind of quiet than the quiet of sleep. Not many. Usually 1 or 2, a herder near the flock, a hunter on the late watch, or simply an elder who slept lightly and tended the fire when the household was tired. The arrangement was practical. A community asleep is a community that needs, in some small way, looking after. The fire could go out, a predator could approach, a child could wake and need quieting. A storm could begin in the small hours and require the wood to be moved. Somebody, usually, was up. This was a kindness, often more than a duty. The night tender was not punished for being awake, and the role circulated. The position was, in many cultures, considered a real honor. The one who watched while the rest slept, who kept the machinery of the household going through the dark hours, who saw the fire down to coals and brought it back up before dawn. In the herding communities of the Eurasian steppe, the late watch over the animals was a position with its own dignity. A young man or sometimes a young woman sitting with a low fire, a long stick and a dog, while the herd dozed in a loose ring around them. An hour would pass and then another. Stars moved overhead in their slow arc, and the watcher learned over many such nights the slow geometry of the constellations and the sounds of the animals and the rhythm of the wind through the grass. By the end of a few seasons of this, the watcher was someone different than the watcher who had begun. In the Andean villages, the night tender was often an older woman whose role was less about defense than about keeping the hearth alive. The door watched, and the wakings of the household attended to before they grew loud enough to disturb the others. She slept, in fact, quite a lot, in a sitting posture by the fire, with one ear open, the way older people in many cultures have slept for a very long time. In the agricultural villages of pre-modern Europe, the night watch was often more formal, a town watchman who walked the streets after dark, calling the hours, ensuring that fires were banked, that gates were closed, that no stranger was abroad with bad intentions. The hourly call in many medieval and early modern towns was a public service, a familiar voice in the night announcing that all was well. People who heard it from their beds went back to sleep more easily because somebody just outside was attending to the night so they did not have to. In the longhouses of the eastern woodlands of North America, the night tender's role was often combined with the keeping of stories. An older person who could not sleep deeply anyway would sit by the fire well into the night and have a story ready when a child woke. If a young one was frightened by a dream, the child would crawl to the fireside and find a grandparent waiting, someone who would settle them with a few minutes of low talk and send them back to the sleeping platform calmer than they had come. Across cultures, the night tender was very often an older person, and there was a practical reason for this. Older bodies tend to sleep more lightly. The same biology that we sometimes regret in our grandparents, the early waking, the broken sleep, the 4 a.m. alertness, was, in the deep history of people then, an asset. The community needed somebody alert at 4 a.m. The community had grandparents. The match was made. It is one of the gentler answers the historical record gives to a question many older people now carry in the small hours. The quiet bewilderment of a body awake when it expected to be asleep, the sense that something must be wrong. Very probably nothing is wrong. Something is, in some old sense, right. Older bodies that slept lightly likely served a purpose for a very long time, tending fires, quieting children, holding the machinery of the night until dawn. We have not, in our drive for efficiency, fully reckoned with what that means. We tell people of all ages to sleep 8 straight hours and treat any deviation as a problem. But a 60-year-old body does not, in general, sleep 8 straight hours. It sleeps in shifts, wakes in the early dark, takes a nap in the afternoon, and finds its rest that way. This is not a failure. Very probably it is the way it was meant to be, the way people arranged sleep across the ages of their members for a very long time. If the arrangement was managed gently, no one suffered. The night tender was usually allowed to nap during the day, to make up for the lighter sleep of the dark hours, and the community arranged itself around the natural sleep patterns of its different ages and roles. The young who slept hardest slept through the night. Those in the middle of life slept most of it. The old who slept lightest kept watch in pieces, with one ear out for the household. Everybody got rested. The night was looked after. Somewhere out there tonight, an older person is awake at 3 a.m, sitting in a chair near a window in a quiet house, watching the dark street. They cannot quite sleep. They have made a cup of something warm. They are not unhappy, simply doing, in a softened modern form, what older people have done in their communities for as long as anyone can remember. Keeping watch, letting the others sleep, the same as it ever was. Most of them are okay. As far back as we can tell, which is quite far, people have almost certainly been dreaming, though whether they always found words for it is another question. Almost certainly the dreaming is older than our kind. Most mammals dream, cats twitch in their sleep, dogs run in theirs, and mice, in their smaller way, seem to replay the mazes they ran during the day. The neural patterns of dreaming, the rapid eye movement, the muscle paralysis, the bursts of activity in the visual and emotional centers of the brain go back, very probably, to the earliest mammals. More than 200 million years ago, long before there was a language to say, "I dreamed last night," there were small warm bodies in burrows, twitching faintly in the dark, processing the day they had just lived. What humans added was talking about it. The earliest written records of dreams come from Mesopotamia, around 4,000 years ago, on the same kind of clay tablets that gave us the first lullaby. People wrote down their dreams. They asked priests what the dreams meant. They consulted dream books, collected interpretations, organized by image that priests had compiled for the use of the literate. A dream about a dove carried one meaning. A dream about a falling roof carried another, and the categories were extensive. Dreams were taken seriously, examined, recorded. In ancient Egypt, the same practice flourished. Egyptian dream books from around 3,500 years ago survive in fragments, and the most complete of them, the Chester Beatty Papyrus, probably copied in Thebes around the time of Ramesses II, lists more than 100 dream images with their interpretations. To dream of drinking warm beer was good. To dream of looking into a deep well was also considered favorable, while a dream of one's bed catching fire was taken as a sign of being driven from one's house. The interpretations were specific, often homely, more like the entries of a household manual than the pronouncements of a mystery cult. People paid scribes to interpret their dreams. The dreams were not idle. They were considered a form of communication, sometimes from gods, sometimes from the dead, sometimes from one's own future self. In Greece, the temples of Asclepius, the god of healing, hosted a practice called incubation. Sick people would travel to the temple, perform purifications, and sleep on the sanctuary floor, believing that during the night, the god would visit them in a dream and reveal the cure. Doctors took the dream seriously, asking patients what they had dreamed and prescribing treatments based partly on the dream content. The architecture of the great Asclepian sanctuaries, at Epidaurus in the Peloponnese, at Pergamon in Asia Minor, at Kos and Athens and a dozen smaller sites around the Mediterranean, was built around this practice. Pilgrims arrived during the day, bathed in the sacred springs, fasted, made small offerings. As evening came, they were led to a long stone hall called the Abaton, where they lay down on simple beds called klenai, often just a hide or fleece spread on the stone, and waited for sleep. Dreams of the god usually featured a snake, Asclepius's emblem, gliding across the temple floor and pausing to touch the dreamer at the place of their illness. By morning, the pilgrim would describe the dream to a temple priest, who would interpret it and prescribe accordingly. Many of those pilgrims, when they recovered, left small votive plaques carved with images of the body part that had been healed: a foot, a hand, an eye, a healed leg. Thousands of these plaques have been found, leaning against the temple walls in ancient time, catalogued in modern museums. They are, taken together, the oldest surviving record of a medicine practiced through dreams. In the Tang dynasty of China, dream interpretation reached an art form. Imperial officials kept dream journals. Buddhist monks developed elaborate systems for parsing dream symbolism. The most ambitious of these systems classified dreams into 6 categories: regular dreams, dreams rooted in fear, dreams that replayed waking thoughts, dreams of joy, stress-born dreams, and the heavy dreams of the deeply tired, each carrying different implications, with the dreams of joy considered most reliable, closest in some sense to truth. Across the Americas, indigenous cultures developed rich traditions of dream work. The Iroquois held that dreams contained the deep desires of the soul, and that ignoring them caused illness. They had a word, sometimes translated as orenda, for the spiritual force that moved through the world and through the soul. And dreams were one of the principal ways orenda spoke to a person. A particularly vivid dream might be enacted, shared with the village, performed in ritual, brought into the waking world so the soul could be satisfied. Festivals were held around midwinter in which any person who had been carrying an unfulfilled dream need could announce it, and the community would do its best, within reason, to enact what the dream had asked. The Anishinaabe and other cultures of the Great Lakes region developed dream catchers, the woven hoops with leather webbing meant to filter the dreams of children, letting good dreams pass through and catching the difficult ones in the web until morning. The sun, when it came, would dissolve what had been caught. How dreams were experienced by the deeper ancestors is, of course, unknown. In Aboriginal Australia, the dream was not just a nightly event. The dreaming, sometimes called the dream time, was a foundational concept, a vast and in some sense eternal background reality in which the ancestors had laid down the world, and from which present-day reality continued to draw its meaning. Dreams were brushes with this larger ground. A dream about an ancestor, an animal, a place was not a private psychological event. It was a communication from the deep past, through the continuous field of the dreaming, into the dreamer's tonight. The events of the dream time were both completed and ongoing. The ancestor who had laid down a particular waterhole in the deep past was, in some sense, still laying it down, every time someone walked past it. The dream at night was an opening into this older simultaneous reality. To dream of a particular place was, in some sense, to be there. The dream was not a metaphor, it was a continuation, on a different level, of the same world the body walked through during the day. Africa, too, had dream traditions of remarkable depth. In many West African cultures, dreams of the recently dead were considered visits, opportunities to receive guidance, to settle old questions, to hear what the elders had to say from the place they had moved to. Funerals often included instructions to the deceased about which dreams to bring and which to spare. The dream and the gathering of the living were continuous with each other, separated only by the membrane of sleep. In medieval Europe, dreams were sorted by Christian theologians into three types: divine dreams sent by God or as angels, mundane dreams produced by the dreamer's own mind and body, and demonic dreams sent by the devil to mislead the sleeper. The categories were treated as serious diagnostic problems, and a monk who had a particularly vivid dream might spend several days consulting his abbot about its likely source, the interpretations often charming in their specificity, precise about matters no one could verify. What is striking when you look across these traditions is how consistently people have wanted to understand their dreams. The interpretations differ wildly from culture to culture. The mechanisms proposed differ just as much, but the underlying impulse, the conviction that the strange, vivid, half-remembered events of the night carry some kind of meaning, is one of the most consistent features of human cultural life. In the small hours, people dreamed. In the morning, they tried to make sense of what had happened. Modern sleep science has its own account of dreaming, somewhat different from any of these. Though even now researchers concede that no one knows fully why dreams take the shapes they do. Honestly, I'm not sure that fully resolves it either. There is something in the specific texture of a dream, the way it feels when you wake from it, that the processing and consolidation account never quite reaches. Dreams, the current understanding suggests, are part of how the brain processes the day, memories sorted, emotions integrated, patterns extracted. The bizarre, often emotional content of dreams reflects the brain's own work, in the safety of sleep, on the experiences it has gathered during the waking hours. During REM sleep, the brain's electrical activity rises to levels nearly indistinguishable from waking, while the body lies almost completely still. Image-rich processing happens in the visual cortex. The thinking and planning regions of the prefrontal cortex go quiet, which is why dreams often feel logically odd. The regions that would normally check for inconsistency are themselves, briefly, asleep. The transition into and out of dreaming has its own characteristic textures. Hypnagogic imagery, the half-pictures that appear behind the eyelids in the moments just before sleep, has been observed and named in many cultures. So has hypnopompic imagery, the visual residue that lingers as a person rises out of sleep in the morning. Lucid dreaming, in which the dreamer knows during the dream that they are dreaming, has been described in Tibetan Buddhist texts more than 1,000 years old, in Aristotle's writing on sleep, and in the laboratory recordings of modern sleep scientists. None of these are mysteries we only recently put instruments to. They are old observations, now being repeated with new instruments. This is not so different from the older traditions, in the end. The Aboriginal Dreamtime saw dreams as encounters with the deeper structure of reality. And modern neuroscience sees dreams as encounters with the deeper structure of the dreamer's own mind. The practical effect is similar. We wake with something the day did not give us. Sometimes a feeling, sometimes a phrase, sometimes a half-image of a place we have never been. What is perhaps most remarkable is not that any one tradition got dreams right, but that across nearly every place people have lived, in almost every period we have records for, the strange, vivid events of the night have been considered worth thinking about. The impulse to interpret, to record, to share. To sit with someone in the morning and say, "I dreamed something," is one of the oldest things we know about being human. In those firelit nights, far back, before any of these traditions had been formalized, Our ancestors woke from dreams and sat up by the embers and turned the dream over in their minds. Some told it to the person beside them in the morning. Some held it privately, working at it for years. Some forgot it within minutes of waking but felt, all that day, that they had been somewhere strange. This is what the human nervous system does when it is allowed to sleep. It dreams. It has dreamed for as long as there has been a human nervous system. Tonight, in this room, you will probably dream too. Some nights of the year, people in most times and places deliberately did not sleep. And they planned for it, prepared for it, considered the staying awake itself to be the point. These were the festivals, the nights when communities gathered, lit fires larger than the household fires, sang and danced, and ate and stayed awake with their neighbors until something in the night had been completed. They were not common, and they were not the rule, not the way ordinary sleep was the rule. They were rare, deliberate, and almost always calendrical, tied to the moon, the solstice, the harvest, the equinox, the start of a season. In the deep human past, before agriculture, festivals were probably tied mostly to seasonal abundance. A successful hunt that yielded more meat than a small group could eat invited a gathering. A run of fish in a particular river, a fruit tree in heavy bearing, a herd that had migrated through a known place. These were the occasions for what we might call early festivals. People lit fires, gathered around them, shared the food, and extended the night deliberately, well past the usual time of sleep, because the abundance deserved to be marked. Someone probably forgot the end of a song and kept going anyway. There is no clear picture of those gatherings, only the logic of the situation. With agriculture, festivals became calendrical, anchored to the cycle of the year in ways that a farming community could plan around for months in advance. Harvest festivals were nearly universal across the agricultural world, and solstice festivals, the longest night of the year, the longest day, became fixed points that entire calendars organized themselves around. The Roman Saturnalia ran for days in the period leading up to the winter solstice, beginning around the 17th of December and stretching for nearly a week. Roman households turned themselves upside down for the duration. Masters served their slaves at table. Gambling was permitted in the open. Small wax candles called ciri were given as gifts along with little clay figurines. And the streets stayed lit and noisy well after dark. The festival drew its power from being a deliberate exception, a managed inversion of the ordinary order. The world remembered, for a few days, that it had not always been arranged the way it was now arranged. Then it returned to the ordinary, and the year resumed. Further east, in Persia and beyond, the winter solstice brought Yalda, a word that means birth, the birth of the sun's long return. Families gathered in the home of the oldest relative, ate pomegranates with seeds the color of the rising sun, ate watermelons kept in cellars since the late summer for this single night, and read poetry, especially the verses of Hafez, sometimes using the book as a kind of oracle, opening a page at random and reading the verse that lay there as guidance for the coming year. They stayed awake until dawn or close to it, talking slowly, eating slowly, listening to the voices of the older relatives. This festival has been celebrated continuously for at least 3,000 years and is still kept today, in Iran, Afghanistan, parts of Central Asia, and among the Iranian diaspora. In the high mesas of what is now northern Arizona, the Hopi kept a different kind of solstice vigil. The soil ceremony lasts about 16 days around the winter solstice and includes the Soyalongwul, the ceremony of turning back the sun, in which Kachina dancers, masked figures representing the spirits of mountain and ancestor, return to the village from the underworld kivas where they have spent the previous half of the year. The whole village takes part. Ritual blessings are given. The Kachinas dance. The fires are tended through the cold nights at high altitude, and the long hours pass with the deep awareness that the sun has been pulled back by the careful work of the community, one of the oldest acts of cosmic responsibility a culture has continuously performed. The southern hemisphere had its own mirror. At the stones of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco, the descendants of the Incas still gather each June to honor Inti, the sun, on the longest night of their hemisphere. The fires are tall, the voices are loud, the night is cold at altitude, but the gathering carries its own warmth, and the morning, when it comes, is met with the ritual gratitude of a people who once organized their entire year around this single date. Across the Indian subcontinent, Diwali, the Festival of Lights, kept for at least 2,500 years, falls at the new moon of the Hindu month Kartika in October or November, and lasts 5 days. Nearly every house lights small oil lamps called diyas, set in rows along walls, balconies, courtyards, and rooftops. From the air, a Diwali night above an Indian city shows tens of millions of small flames, a slow gold replacement of the dark, a deliberate decision of the entire culture to push the longest nights of the lunar month back, with hand-laid points of light. The tradition of Noche Buena, the good night, observed on Christmas Eve in Spain, Latin America, and the Philippines, follows a similar shape. The family gathers for a late dinner that begins around 10 in the evening and runs past midnight. Children stay awake. Grandparents nod at the table. At midnight, in older traditions, the family attends the Misa de Gallo, the Rooster's Mass, returning home in the small hours to small gifts and the gradual settling of the household. The Christian framing is layered over much older solstice vigil customs. The deep pattern, the household refusing on this one night to sleep at the usual time, is older than the Christian story superimposed on it. In Northern Europe, midsummer was a night of bonfires and dancing, sometimes lasting until the brief darkness ended near 3 in the morning. In the Scandinavian midsummer, in the Latvian Jani, in the Russian Ivan Kupala, the same elements recurred. The great communal fire, the herbs gathered at sunset, the ritual leaping of the flame, the songs that lasted until the eastern sky lightened and the sun came back. These festivals, however different in costume and meaning, shared a few features almost everywhere they appeared. At the center, a fire much larger than a household fire, a bonfire or a communal blaze that the whole gathered community could see by, around which the dancing happened and the food was distributed. Music continued for hours, often from community members rather than specialists, weaving through the night without a clear endpoint. Bodies moved together in patterns that the daytime did not permit, and the food that arrived was the rich food that ordinary days did not allow. The seasonal fruits, the special bread, the fermented drinks, the whole community well fed and warm and surrounded by other people in motion, the night slipping slowly into something that the ordinary dark had never contained. Time stretched at these festivals, in many cultures suspended from its usual shape. People slept when they slept and woke when they woke, sometimes within the festival itself, in cycles through those hours. The night did not have a normal shape, it had a festival shape, looser, slower, more accommodating of bodies that needed to rest and then return. A festival well conducted was a way the community renewed itself. The harvest was in, or the longest night had turned, and the community gathered to acknowledge what had been completed and to ready itself for what came next. The festival was the punctuation between two stretches of ordinary time. Many of these festivals are still with us, in modified form. Christmas, in its Northern Hemisphere version, sits almost exactly where the ancient solstice festivals sat. Diwali fills Indian autumn nights with millions of small flames. Hanukkah is 8 days of lights in the darkest period of the year. Lunar New Year, in China and Vietnam and Korea, falls on the second new moon after the winter solstice, with fireworks and lanterns and family gatherings that go late into the night. Eid al-Fitr ends the fast of Ramadan with celebratory meals and gatherings that continue past the usual hour of sleep. These nights have not been forgotten. Customs shifted over centuries, and the reasons given for the gatherings changed too. But the underlying pattern, the central fire or its modern equivalent, the music, the food, the staying awake together past the usual hour, has continued without real interruption. In the deep human past, on certain nights of the year, people refused to sleep. On those same nights, we still refuse. There is something beautiful about that continuity. A child raised in a modern city still attends, in some form, the festival of lights of their tradition. A grandparent at the same gathering remembers their own grandparent doing roughly the same thing in a smaller village. Their grandparent's grandparent did the same in a smaller village still, and somewhere in the deeper past, beyond the reach of any specific memory. Somebody around a great communal fire on the longest night of the year did, in essence, what the family is doing tonight. Sleep was the rule. The festivals were the exception. Most families kept both without much deliberation. They slept on the ordinary nights and stayed awake on the special ones, and that was simply how the year moved. The body quietly holds more than we usually give it credit for. We are descended, every one of us, from people who slept by fires. Not in some metaphorical sense, in a literal genetic generation by generation sense. For most of those 300,000 years, our ancestors slept beside fires through most or all of their lives. The conditions of those sleeps, the warmth on the front of the body, the smell of wood smoke, the irregular crackle of burning wood, the dim red light, the proximity of other breathing bodies, the sound of the wind in the trees, the shape of the stars overhead, were not occasional features of human life. They were the standard conditions of human sleep. We carry the body that was shaped by that. This is not a mystical claim. It is a straightforward observation about what the human nervous system was selected to recognize as safety. For tens of thousands of generations, the conditions of safety at night were the conditions of the campfire and the close family and the quiet dark beyond. If a body relaxed in those conditions, it slept. If it slept, it lived through the night and reproduced. After enough generations, the population was made up of people whose bodies recognized the campfire conditions as safety and let go. And we are, in the most literal sense, those people. The implications are gentle. They simply explain why certain things calm us in ways that other things, on paper just as comfortable, do not. The hum of a fan can substitute for the slow rumble of distant wind. The warm light of a lamp with a yellow shade can substitute for the warm light of a fire. The breath of a sleeping partner can substitute for the breath of a sibling on a nearby mat. If a substitute is offered close enough, the body uses it. And the body is, in its way, generous. But the originals are still recognized. Walk into a room where a real fire is burning, and something shifts. The shoulders soften, the breathing slows, the face, without thinking, turns toward the heat. If you sit by a campfire on a clear night, you can watch humanity reassemble itself around the flame. Children grow quieter. Adults talk in lower voices. Even the dogs often lie closer to the fire than they would lie to a heater. This is recognition. This is the body, not the mind, identifying conditions it has lived through for hundreds of thousands of years. Look at the timing of the modern body, and the old pattern surfaces almost everywhere. Core temperature reaches its lowest point at around 4 in the morning, exactly the hour at which our ancestors were likely finishing the second sleep, ready to rise with the lightening of the eastern sky. Cortisol, the hormone of waking arousal, begins its slow climb out of its overnight trough at around 3 in the morning, reaching a peak roughly 30 minutes after natural waking. This climb is sometimes called the cortisol awakening response, and it is timed, on average, to the conditions of an outdoor people who needed to be alert by dawn. Melatonin released from the pineal gland at the back of the brain in response to falling light levels begins to rise around 2 hours after sundown and reaches its peak between midnight and 2 in the morning, the very hours of the medieval watch. The body's whole hormonal architecture of the night is, in its peaks and troughs, the architecture of an outdoor century, in which fires went down, watches were kept, and families rose with the sun. There are other recognitions. The smell of certain woods burning, pine, oak, applewood, produces in many people a calm that does not have a clear modern source. The sound of distant rain on a roof or wind in trees produces sleepiness widely. The dim, warm light of evening, especially the light of a low sun coming through windows, brings on a particular kind of relaxation. These are not random preferences. They are echoes of the conditions in which people spent most of their evenings for most of human history. The body holds the watch too. Many people who have woken at 3 in the morning for years in modern bedrooms with blackout curtains are not failing to sleep. They are doing what their ancestors likely did. The body is still keeping the old schedule. It has not yet, in its deeper biology, agreed that the night should be one block. Researchers have placed subjects in dark environments for 2 weeks, with no artificial light, and watched them drift back into a first sleep, a watch, and a second sleep, more or less on their own, within about a week. Thomas Ware, the same researcher whose dim light experiment was mentioned earlier, observed something else his subjects reported. During the wakeful interval, the modern reappearance of the medieval watch, they did not feel anxious. They did not feel that something was wrong. They lay in the dim room, awake, and described a quality of mind they did not usually have. The chatter of the day was gone. The plans of tomorrow had not yet started. The thoughts that came slowly and felt unusually clear. Some subjects reported this hour as one of the most contemplative of their lives. The body, when allowed its old pattern, found in the watch a kind of quiet the modern day rarely permits. The lullaby, too, is in the body. Researchers have shown that adults respond to slow, low-pitched melodies in roughly the same physiological ways infants do. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, cortisol drops. Why this is so, on a molecular level, remains uncertain. The science does not yet have a satisfying answer. The same acoustic features that calm a baby calm a grown adult, because the adult was once the baby, and the body has not forgotten what the slow, soft sound meant in the dim original room. The closeness of other bodies, similarly. Studies of couples and of families who share sleeping spaces show measurable physiological synchrony. Heartbeats align, breathing rhythms drift into pattern, body temperatures equalize. People, given other bodies to sleep near, become a single rhythmic system. This is not psychology. This is physiology. The body is doing what it has been doing for a very long time. Studies of infants who sleep near a parent, compared with those who sleep alone in another room, find measurable differences in vagal tone, the activity of the vagus nerve, which governs much of the body's resting calm. Infants in proximity to a sleeping adult show steadier heart rates, more efficient transitions between sleep stages, and lower overnight cortisol levels. This is not a recommendation about how anyone should arrange their household. It is simply a statement about how the small body was built to function. For most of human history, the small body slept within reach of the larger body. The youngest among us still expect that arrangement on a level the conscious mind never reaches. Adults carry the same responses in softer forms. The presence of a partner in the bed, of a dog at the foot of the bed, of a cat on the chest, all of these produce in many people the same downward shift in heart rate and the same slow deepening of breath that the body produces when it senses, by some older measure, that safety is present. The fan, the white noise machine, the television left on low, these are modern attempts to provide the same signal. Someone, something, somewhere nearby is filling the silence, is making a small sound, is keeping the watch. The body relaxes. The body has not been fooled. It has simply been given enough of the old conditions to do its work. The body holds all of this, and the meaning is gentler than it might first appear. It means that we are not as separated from our ancestors as the surface of the modern world might suggest. The phone is new, and the bulb is new, and the private room with its blackout curtains is new. But the body lying down in the dim room is the same body, with the same responses to dim light, to warm sound, to the breath of someone nearby, to evening falling into night. These responses were laid down across hundreds of thousands of years of fires and households and shared sleeping platforms. When you lie down tonight, the body that lies down is older than the room, older than the city, older than the language you think in, older than agriculture and most of what we usually call human history, older than most of the tools people have made and most of the art. You are the same body that lay beside the fires. That is not a sentimental statement. As far as the biology tells us, it is simply true. Every cell in your body is likely descended, in unbroken line, from cells in bodies that slept by campfires for 10,000 generations. The body that lies down tonight carries that same lineage, the same equipment, the same slow physiology of dropping into sleep at the end of the day. The body settles into this without needing to be reminded. When the right conditions arrive, it simply does what it has always done, softening and quieting and releasing the day, settling into the long, unhurried country of sleep. The conditions can be partial. They almost always are now. There is no fire in most modern bedrooms, no breathing siblings on a nearby mat, no roof of stars. But the body works with what is offered. A dim lamp can serve. A heavy blanket can serve. A partner's slow breath can serve. The familiar ceiling above the bed, lived under for years, can serve. The body, generous in its accommodations, finds what it needs in the new room and accepts it. The body remembers. That much the biology seems clear on. We have been through a great deal of night together in this telling. The cave hearths a million years ago, the biphasic sleep of the medieval village, the fires of the Kalahari and the longhouses of the eastern woodlands and the courtyard roofs of the desert summer cities, the lullabies in 20 languages, the shared sleeping platforms, the lunar calendars, the night tenders, the dreams, the festivals, the bodies lying close, breathing through the dark hours of the night. These are not separate stories. They are the same story, told in different rooms. People have spent their nights doing these things, as far back as we can trace, sleeping close, tending fires, singing children down into rest, letting one or two stay awake while the rest let go, watching the moon turn, reading the stars, waking briefly in the watch and lying quiet for an hour, and slipping back into the second sleep, telling, by firelight, the stories that would not survive in daylight, dreaming, sometimes gathering on a particular date into the great festivals that refused, deliberately, to sleep. This is the inheritance. This is what human beings have been, on their evenings and their nights, for as long as there have been people. We sit tonight on the very thin top layer of all of that. The light is electric, the walls heated invisibly, the phone somewhere charging on a surface that nobody had to tend. The street outside, if there is a street, is lit by lamps that nobody had to fuel by hand. The bed is private. The room is quiet in ways that no medieval room and no longhouse and no cave mouth was ever quiet. We have, in many practical ways, mastered the conditions of comfort that our ancestors only approximated. Something in that framing gives me pause, though, because the body lying down tonight is not more evolved than those earlier bodies. It is, by any physiological measure, the same body. The brain that closes its eyes and begins to drift is the same brain, and the nervous system underneath it, the one that recognizes warmth and dim light and low sound and another person's breath and the safety of a familiar room. That nervous system was shaped, every fiber of it, by hundreds of thousands of evenings of campfire and household and watchful elder and quiet song. All of that comes with you when you lie down, not as a thought you have to hold, but as something already settled into the tissues of you, waiting. Not consciously, not as a memory you can name, but as a body, as the generous organism that families and households have been building, generation after generation, for longer than most of us can really hold in mind. When the room dims tonight, the body recognizes the dimming. It does what bodies have done in dim rooms for hundreds of thousands of years. It begins to release. The tensions of the day soften. The breath, without instruction, slows a little. The muscles around the eyes settle. The thoughts, which during the day raced and competed and demanded, gradually grow softer-edged, less urgent, less strict in their grip. This is sleep approaching, not arriving from outside, but rising from inside, the way it has most likely always risen. The body is doing what it has done, night after night, in every climate, in every century, in every human room. There is no hurry, there never was. The first lesson, by the first fire, was that the night was large and could be trusted to take its time. That lesson has not been revoked. It is still in the body. It is still in this room. Every fire that has ever been was the same fire. That is a strange thing to sit with, but it is, in its way, accurate. Picture a woman tending a fire on the floor of a rock shelter in the eastern African highlands, 30,000 years ago. The fire is small. She is feeding it slow, handfuls of dry grass and then a single thicker branch. Her child is asleep against her side, wrapped in a hide. Outside, the savannah stretches dark in every direction. Somewhere a hyena calls. Somewhere else a nightbird answers. The fire is enough. The shelter is enough. The night is large. Picture a family on the California coast 5,000 years ago, in a willow-framed shelter near a kelp beach. The fire is in the center, burning driftwood that is dried for a season. The grandmother is humming a song with no words. 2 children are asleep on a woven mat. The husband is mending a net by feel. Outside, the surf is coming in. By the fire. Under the shelter. Inside the long night. Picture a Norse household in Iceland in the year 900. A long, sod-walled hall. A central fire of birch and dried sheep dung. Cattle in a stall at one end. A row of sleeping platforms along the wall. A woman is weaving by the fire, slow, by feel as much as by sight. The wind outside is cold and strong, and the snow has been falling for 2 days. Inside, the smoke rises through the ridge, and the hall is warm enough. The fire was small. The shelter held. The night moved past. Picture a peasant cottage in Galicia in the year 1880. A stone hearth. A clay oven beside it, still warm from the bread of the afternoon. A father, a mother, 3 children, a grandmother. The father has banked the fire for the night. The grandmother is sitting up later than the rest, knitting by the last orange light of the embers. A log settles in the ash with a soft crack, and she does not look up. The wind in the chestnut trees outside is loud, but the cottage is solid. Fire, shelter, dark. The same arrangement every time. Picture a colonial New England farmhouse in 1750. A center chimney with 3 fireplaces feeding into it. Children asleep upstairs, 2 in each bed, under heavy wool quilts. The father has banked the kitchen fire and the parlor fire. The mother is reading her Bible by a single candle. The dog is asleep at her feet. The frost is forming on the windows. The fire is enough. The shelter is enough. The night is large. Picture a residential street in 1910, one upstairs window burning with an electric bulb, the first on the block. The other houses still lit by oil and candle. Everyone has gone to bed. In one of those other houses, a grandmother is sitting up by a lamp, finishing a piece of mending. She has watched the bulb across the street come on at the same hour every evening for 3 weeks. She has not yet decided whether she likes it. The lamp in her room is enough. The night is large. Each of those nights was a complete world. Each of them ended in sleep. The fires did not know one another. The families did not know the families of other generations. But the pattern was the same. A contained fire, a shelter, a few people together, a dark and patient night around them. Large enough to swallow whatever the day had brought, generous enough to let everyone rest. All of them, in some sense, the same fire, the same human practice, the same warming of the front of the body while the back cools, the same dim red light and irregular sound, and gathering of attention to a warm center, around which other bodies sit and breathe, and eventually let go of the day. We are still doing it. We are doing it in modified forms, and we are sometimes doing it without quite knowing that we are doing it. Wood burning behind glass in a cabin stove, that is a fire. A candle on the dinner table, a fire. The reading lamp with its warm bulb at the bedside, a fire in its way. Even the screen running a slow video of a hearth with crackling audio on a winter evening, even that is, recognizably, a fire. The body finds the fire wherever it is offered. It does not require the original conditions, only conditions close enough. The body is finding those conditions tonight. The light is low, the room is warm, and the bed is yours. The blanket heavy in exactly the right way. The voice in the room, this voice, telling these stories, is one in a line of voices that has been telling stories around fires for as long as there have been fires to tell stories around. The voice is doing its old work, and the body is recognizing that work, and the two are settling into the old arrangement. The arrangement is sleep and rest. Families doing what they have done in this modern room, on this night, in your specific body that is older, in its lineage, than any city or any country, or any lit street. Earlier humans rested before this. 10,000 generations of evenings. They rested last night in millions of rooms across this planet, and will rest tomorrow night and the night after, in an unbroken line that began in the firelit caves and has not, despite all the changes of the surface, ever really ended. You are part of that line. You have always been part of it. Your sleep tonight is a contribution to a very long inheritance. And the inheritance has, in its unhurried way, been preparing the body to receive this sleep for hundreds of thousands of years. Let it. The night you are in is connected by simple causation, by an unbroken thread of bodies, to those nights. Same people, same sky, the same body in the only sense the body uses the word. There's something quietly reassuring in that, hard to explain exactly, but it does. Not because anything remarkable is being said, but because the work the body is doing tonight is not new work. It is not work the body must figure out alone. It is among the oldest practices we have, and it has been practiced a great many times. And it has, every single time, been good enough to carry the body through to morning. The room is dim enough, the voice is quiet enough. The night, outside the window, is doing what nights do, turning slowly, the moon in some phase of its cycle. The stars somewhere above the lit haze. People in this part of the world, settling toward rest. The fires are banked. Lullabies have been sung somewhere, to small bodies that are now dropping toward sleep. Night tenders have taken up their quiet positions, not formally anymore, but here and there, in the soft awakenings of older people in still houses. The festivals are not tonight. Tonight is an ordinary night, which means the old work is being done, which means people are sleeping. You are sleeping, or you are very nearly there. The story has done what stories at firesides have always done. It has filled the time and warmed the room, and it has placed you, gently, near the fire, and let the fire do the rest. The fire is enough. The night is large. The body knows this, though you may not need to think it. The sleep is already on its way, has been on its way for hours, and is now simply arriving. The long inheritance on which you are the latest entry holds you tonight as it has held everybody that has ever closed its eyes in a dim, warm room and trusted the dark. It is a trustworthy dark. It has been trustworthy for hundreds of thousands of years and will be trustworthy tonight and tomorrow night and on every night that anybody, anywhere, lies down inside it. People have slept, in some form, every night of their existence. People sleep tonight. You sleep tonight, and the fires have been banked, the watch quietly handed over, the room around you holding. Drift now, if you have not already. The night is large. There is no hurry to leave it. If you have stayed awake to the end of this telling, you have done so kindly, and you may go now whenever the body chooses. There is nothing more to keep you. The fires of this long history have been gathered briefly in this room. They have done their slow work. The body has heard what it knows. If you have already drifted somewhere in the middle, then this closing is for the body alone, which can hear the cadence of a voice without needing to follow the words. The body knows, on this level, what is being offered. A continuation of the warm sound, a continuation of the dim room, a continuation of the safety in which human beings have, for as long as they have had shelter, slept. Either way, what comes next is just a settling. The room is dim. That is the first thing the body notices, not bright. The light, whatever it is low, and the eyes, even closed, recognize this and let go of their work. The eyelids rest against the eyes, and the body understands, without being told, that the conditions for sleep are here. The room is warm. Not hot, not stuffy. Just warm enough that the body does not need to work to keep itself warm. The blanket is doing that. The walls are doing it. The air around the body is the temperature of an old human room at night. And people have slept in rooms of this temperature for as long as they have had rooms. The room is quiet, which is different from silent. Silence is the sound of a forest where something has just stopped moving. The body does not, in its deeper understanding, like silence. This quiet is full of small, reliable sounds instead. The hum of the night, the breathing of any other body in the house, the faint sound of the world doing its quiet business. The body recognizes small, reliable sounds and releases. These three, the dim, the warm, the quiet, are the conditions humans have recognized for hundreds of thousands of years. The body, lying inside them, does what it knows how to do. It softens. It drifts. There is no work for you to do. There never was. The body was going to do this on its own. The voice in this room has been a kind of accompaniment, a way of marking the time, a way of keeping the body company while it did its slow, patient, ancient work of letting the day go. The fire is small. The shelter is small. The night is large. Those were not words most of the people who came before us would have used, though they would have felt it, lying down inside the smallness of the shelter, watching the smallness of the fire, feeling the night press large and patient around them. That was the right arrangement. They rested inside it for hundreds of thousands of years. The fire is enough, the shelter is enough, the night is large and we are small, and that is likely how it has always been. The day is gone by now. Whatever was in it, whatever was worried about, whatever was rehearsed and re-rehearsed in the back of the mind during the busy hours, the day has been finished mostly by the simple act of closing the eyes and listening. The day has receded. The day is in the past, where days go, where they wait without urgency for whatever attention you may give them in the morning. The morning is far. The morning is hours away. There is no need to think about the morning. The morning will arrive on its own, in its own time, in the slow turning of the hemisphere, with whatever light it brings. You will meet the morning then, when it is here. You do not need to meet it now. Now is the quiet middle of the night, or the end of an evening, or whatever hour the body is chosen to lie down in. Now is simply the time of the body's rest. Now is the long inheritance in action. The fires of this history are banked. The lullabies are folded into the dark. The starlight is moving across the sky outside, following the same paths it has followed for billions of years. The moon, in some phase, is doing what the moon does. People on this hemisphere are mostly asleep. Millions of bodies in millions of rooms, all of them inside variations of the dim, the warm, the quiet, all of them part of the same evening, going on across the hemisphere. You are one of them. It is a quiet kind of company. There is no need to feel any of the others nearby in any specific way. They are simply there, doing what you are doing, in their own rooms, on their own beds, with their own particular bodies that are also descendants of the firelit nights. On this level, you are not alone in your sleep. People sleep together, in pieces and patches and parallel arrangements across most continents, on most nights. The fire holds, the night holds, the body holds. The fire, whatever fire is keeping the room warm tonight, electric or gas or candle or wood stove or simply the slow heat of the body under a blanket, holds. The night around the room does not collapse into anything else. It is the same patient night that has held everybody that has ever lain down. The body, doing its slow, patient work, holds also. It rests. If the body is breathing, the body is fine. The breath continues. You do not have to manage it. The breath knows what to do. It has been doing it since you were small enough to fit inside your mother's body. The breath continues. Slow now, easy now. And each cycle of in and out, is one more small turning of the night. The heart continues. It has been doing it for as long as there has been a you. The heart slows a little, in sleep, the way the heart of every sleeping human and every sleeping creature slows. This slowing is part of the descent. The body is moving, in its careful way, into the deeper places of the night. If a thought is loud, it can be set down. The thoughts by now are softer. Some may still be drifting through, less urgent than they were. They are like the wood settling in an old fire, small noises that mean nothing, that the body need not attend to. The thoughts will quiet on their own, the way the fire quiets on its own, given enough time and enough warmth. There is no hurry. The night is large. The night will hold. You may let go. You have done enough today, and you may sleep now. If you have any thoughts about what you have heard tonight, they can be set down now, the way people set down the names by the fire, knowing they would be there in the morning. The two sleeps and the watch between them, the fire on the hearth, the lullabies in 20 languages, the shared sleeping platforms, the night tenders, the dreams, the festivals on certain rare nights, the body that holds all of it in the small, slow language of breath, in warmth and dim light, and the sound of another body breathing nearby. These can rest. They have rested before, they will rest tonight in your body, which is good at carrying old things gently into the dark. You do not need to remember any of it specifically. The body has heard. The body will hold what is useful. The rest will fade, the way most evenings fade, gracefully into the dark. Tomorrow, if you remember this telling, it will come back in fragments. A campfire, a grandmother's hum, the shape of a constellation, the phrase about the watch between the two sleeps. Whichever fragments belong to you will come back. The rest will have done their work in passing, by being here, by being said, by being part of the warm sound of the room. This is how stories at firesides have worked, for as long as there have been firesides. Most of what is said is forgotten. Some of it is kept. The kept pieces become, over a lifetime, the listener's own. The fire has fed the listener something. The listener does not need to know what end. The fire here is just the sound of a voice in a dim room. The fire is the long inheritance still doing its work. The fire is, even now, slowly going down into embers. The way the fires of earlier humans have always gone down into embers as the household drifted into sleep. The fire was small, the shelter held. The night, outside, moved past. The fire is enough. The shelter is enough. The night holds. The body is old at this. It has done it before, in this room and in every room that came before this one. The night holds you. The room holds you. The bed holds you. The blanket holds you. The breath, your own breath, holds you, going in and out without your help, the way it has gone in and out since you were small. And all of it is in its place. The dark around you is trustworthy. It has been trustworthy for a very long time. The bodies of earlier humans, going back to the first firelit night, have lain down in it and let go. Evening after evening, the whole length of their lives. You may let go now. The story is done. The hearth is low. The night, outside the window, is quiet. People on this hemisphere are settling. You are settling. There is no more to say. The fire is small. The shelter is small. The night is large. The fire holds. The night holds. The body holds. This was Bedtime History on Terravox. The voice in this room, telling these stories, is one small voice in the long line of voices that have told stories around fires for as long as there have been fires. It joins the inheritance for a few hours each night, and then steps back, the way the storytellers around the old fires step back, and lets the listener rest. If you would like to fall asleep to more of these stories, the channel is always here. There is no urgency. We will be here tomorrow night and the night after, telling the slow histories that the body knows how to listen to. Thank you for spending the night with this telling. The fire has been kept. The watch has been quietly passed forward. The night around you holds. The body is old at this. It has done it before, in this room and in every room that came before. The dark around you is something humans have been letting go into for hundreds of thousands of years. You can let go now too. That's the whole story, really. The fire has been kept. Sleep well. I'll be here tomorrow. Good night.